Hey everyone, this is kind of an introduction to a video series I'm going to do on the Evinrude 48 Special. The reason I'm doing this, I couldn't find any other motors out there that looked like this one in a video or anywhere online to help me diagnose and learn how this motor actually works. So I had to order the repair facility master manual to actually find this motor. I couldn't even find a dedicated manual for this motor. So I ordered the complete service center manual that covers about every motor Evinrude ever made. 2 strokes, 4 strokes, 2 horsepower right on up to 200 and something horsepower. Well, anyway, it did have this motor in the manual, so I was happy about that. But out of all the wiring schematics in that book for every motor, this is the only one that would not give you the color codes for these wires. So that was great. But anyway, the issue again, once I brought it in here to get it cleaned up, it would not start. Before, it would start and run almost every time, but at an idle, it would skip on 1 cylinder. So what I did to check it out, I pulled the flywheel off, and underneath the flywheel, I noticed a bunch of material that had melted down in here, actually filling up all these little grooves. So I pulled the little coil right here off, and this is what it looked like before. This is the original one. And you see that gap in there, that's where all that material leaked out of and got on this plate. And that material actually got on the flywheel and slung it all over all of this, and as well as the timing sensor, which I call a trigger, right there. I cleaned up all that and ordered this coil here, and it actually came with the laminate. The first one I looked at and was going to order, it did not. It just come with this, and not exactly knowing how to mount these things, I didn't want to try to do that. So I ordered this one that I happened to find that had the laminate with it and put it on there. And once I got this in and seen, it was totally different than the original one and seen how they mounted it, then I started looking for these, because nowhere could I find this available with the laminate already, but I could find these little coils. And by getting this one and seeing how it was mounted and all, I felt sure I could get these on the laminate myself. So I did that. I ordered this coil, this for the ignition system, and this coil, which is for the charging system. Actually, these two. And when they come in, you have to remove the old ones, of course. And there's all kinds of glue and gump, and they have little clips on the back to hold them on. So I was kind of wondering, how do you keep these from coming off? Do you glue them? What do you do? Well, further inspection of this one, I seen they have wedges in there. Now, none of this stuff come with instructions, which is really great, but they have wedges in there. So I started looking again on the internet and still couldn't find anything about this, but I called the company that manufactures these, and they actually had a PDF available to show you how to put these on. So I downloaded that, and what it tells you to do, once you slide these on, you take one of these pieces of laminate. If you can't see that, there's a whole bunch of little layers of metal right there. Well, you take the bottom piece and you fold it down and knock it back that secures this onto the laminate. And you do the same thing over here, and you do the top as well. So once you got those bent down and it's secured to the laminate, you're good to go. Now, the only other issue I had with these is, as you can see, they're round. The ones that came off were square. So I had to take a Dremel tool, and on the back side back here, I had to Dremel them down square so that it would fit all the way down onto the laminate. Because before, it wasn't going past this part, and these were going to hit the flywheel because of the size of them. So we got all that worked out, got it like it's supposed to be. Run the wires under the plate, and this plate does have to come off to do this, to change these things. And then when you're installing all these, once you get them set to the right clearance, you should use thread locker on these. You don't want these here things backing out and get caught up in the flywheel because it would destroy everything underneath there. So I had the plate off, got them all hooked up, wired up, ran the wires down through here with the little securing band they have. Coming outside, and then I put cloth electrical tape on there because it flexes. This needs to be able to move, so whatever you got coming out here, all this here has to move. Another thing, when I first got this boat, it didn't want to idle down because this plastic sheath they had on here had gotten hard, and we'll show you that real quick. This is the CDI, and that goes up in there. Well, this piece here is really, really hard. You can't even hardly move it at all. So what it was doing is creating too much resistance on this part here, not allowing this plate to pull back. So what I did to circumvent that is just added a spring to it so that I could have extra tension pulling this back. Made the throttle a little harder to mash, but it served the purpose. So I'm thinking that the only thing that returns this thing back to idle, as you can see carburetors and all moving with this, and what was happening is it would get about right there and stop when you go back to idle, but then the motor wouldn't idle down. So when I put that spring on and pulled all this back, it allowed the throttle plates to close, the timing the retard back down to where it had to, come down to a reasonable idle. So I'm thinking the magnetic resistance of that flywheel spinning in here, drawing on these here coils, that's what acts as a spring. It actually pulls that in the clockwise position. So that's what the use was. So telling you this because if you put anything on here and you don't allow this here to be able to move, your motor's not going to want to come back down on an idle. So it has to be flexible. All right, so I got all that on it, put the flywheel back on it. The motor started right up, still skipping on number one at an idle. Like I said, that was a problem I had from day one. So I wanted to diagnose that. Why is it skipping on number one? So the first thing I did is I took the two leads coming from the CDI. This is a two-stroke or two-cylinder. You got two leads coming to the coil from the CDI. One's for number one cylinder, one's for number two cylinder. So I figured if I just swap those two wires, and if I still had no fire on number one, then it would be the coil. But if I swap those two wires and it stopped firing on number two and started firing on number one, that tells me the coil's fine and I've got a problem further back. So I did that, and sure enough, when I swapped those two wires, it started firing on number one and would not fire on number two. So coil's fine. So we move on to the CDI. And here goes our CDI. So I pulled this thing out, and this is what it looks like. So it's 27 years old. Side of it's rubbed off, you can't even read the name on it. That wire is so stiff it won't allow the plate to come back to an idle. And I was like, well, we're going to change that regardless because it's caused me too many other issues if it ain't even bad, but I do want to know if it's bad. So how do we do that? Well, that goes back to this trigger up here, or sensor. And there's two wires coming out of it, which would be these two big wires here. This white with the black tracer and the black with the white tracer. Well, I wasn't sure how this thing works, whether those are number one and number two cylinder triggers or whether that's a ground and a trigger wire. I didn't know. So once I found this motor in the catalog that I ordered, I come to find out that they are both trigger wires. So I don't know if this is grounding through the body somewhere. There's no ground straps up here or up here, but there was nothing I could really see. But once the bolts go through there, maybe they're touching something, the ground, I don't know. Haven't figured that part out yet, but I did figure out that both of those wires out there are specific to number one and number two cylinders. So if that's the case, then we should be able to just swap those two wires around. And by doing that, if our fire changes from number one to number two, or no fire condition changes from number one to number two, then we know it's the trigger. It's only sending out a signal on one wire. However, if we swap them wires and it continues not to fire on number one, then it can be none other than the CDI. This box right here. So that's how you diagnose it. If you have one that looks like this, That should help you a great deal. Most of the ones I've been able to find online or in videos has a totally different looking assembly under here. It's all in one unit, non-serviceable. This particular one, you can change each component out individually. I've elected to go ahead and change everything. I have ordered this, and I ordered a new CDI because, as I said, it's 27 years old and you don't want to be out on the lake and have a failure. And since I was able to find good parts, all this is CDI stuff, you know, manufactured by them, and they have a real good reputation. That's what we're going to go with. Coming over here to the flywheel, there's nothing in there that can really give you an indication of it using anything to determine number one, number two cylinder coming around. I ain't quite figured that part out yet. When I do, y'all sure enough know. The only thing I see different underneath here is this dash. Now I've checked this here for any kind of magnetism or any kind of, you know, metal other than the cast in there, cast iron, and I don't see anything. So magnets seem to be the same size. So I'm not exactly sure how it determines what cylinder's coming around. Somebody told me there was a sensor in the top of the flywheel. I'm not seeing that here. There's that little arrow right there and an arrow right there. They're both pointing in the same direction, which is where this thing's at. So I'm not exactly sure how that works. But evidently this flywheel was changed 10/21, which is just like a month before I purchased the boat. So evidently they were trying to find that issue and then change the flywheel. Probably spent $300 on that and said, I'm done, and we're selling it. So I bought it and really didn't, like I say, have a bunch of problems with it. I used it for a couple of years without any issues of being able to do what I want to do. It would fire up, it would go, push the boat about 40, 42 mile an hour and start every single time, but it just had that low idle skip. And here recently, it was getting harder and harder to start cold. Once you ran it, it would run fine. So I brought it in, cleaned it up, had a couple surgeries done, so the boat has sat for a good while and gotten very nasty. So I brought it in here to buff it out, clean it up. And after I got all that done, it would not start, would not fire on either cylinder. So that brings us to what we're doing now. And I'm guessing that's the date, 10/21. Can't see it being anything else. And that's, like I say, just before I bought the boat. So evidently we're having issues. All right, again, this is series 1. I've got the manual now, which gives me all the specifications on what the ohms reading should be on this stuff. It does not give me the color codes on these wires, but it does give me a diagram that shows me from where it comes from and where it goes, which is extremely irritating, you know, to figure out. But because like some of the stuff's kind of close, you got these two wires coming in here close, and you don't know for certain whether their replacement part will have it coming out at the same place like those two down in there. You know, if they've got it identical to this, then I can look at the color of this wire and then see where it goes to, trace it with my finger, and then know what color wire to put where. And that's aggravating. Why they couldn't just label them, I don't know. But it ain't really difficult to figure out. So we'll get it done. I will do a video of each individual thing we do from this point on. I'm going to put this old coil back on it. I just took it off trying to get a number off of it, which I wasn't very successful because, as you can notice, the number, if I can get it untangled here, the number is partially worn off. But I think we got the right one coming. I think we got the right trigger coming. We're going to change everything under here. So once this flywheel goes back on, after the final assembly, it is not coming back off, hopefully, for my lifetime. Here's a new rectifier put on there because I think I mentioned earlier that the charging system wasn't putting out like it should, which was probably mainly due to all the material that come from that coil had gotten around, was covering the magnets, was covering the two charging coils. And it may even been the issue with it not wanting to fire on number one cylinder because this was covered in it. And I just cleaned all that off. And we're going to put it back together and see whether we now have fire on both cylinders. If we do, great, but I'm still changing them parts out. And if we don't, then we'll know what parts caused it. And then I'll let y'all know along the way so that y'all can identify exactly what part, so get to determine which one needs to be changed if you don't want to just replace them all, which I would highly recommend if you can find a good part with a with a good reputation and good reviews, to go ahead and, if your motor is this old, go ahead and change it. Now I did look at repowering this boat to a 4-stroke, and you're looking at $11,000. I want to go a little bit bigger. The biggest this boat will let you go is 80. And so to go to, I think it was a 75 was the closest thing I could find that I wanted. Yeah, it was $11,400 for the motor and installation and the controller. And then it would be a nice $300+ a year to the county tax people for it to sit in my yard 98% of the time, because I can't always go fishing, health isn't good, and can't always go when I want to go. So who knows if it gets used or not. All right, we're going to stop this video here. Look forward, if you're interested, on seeing how to diagnose each component. Will be in the further videos or future videos, and we'll label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many it takes, to give you as much knowledge I can as far as determining what component is bad. That way you can change what you want to change and be done with it. These flywheels are really hard to get off after they've been on there a while. Actually, this one has stripped out the bolts right there that you hook your puller to. So I tapped it out a larger size. It actually pulled those threads out as well. So I ended up going to 5/16, quarter 20, tapped them out to that, used hardened bolts, and was able to get the flywheel off. So just telling you that if you're changing anything under there and your boat's got some age on it, I'd change it all. Now when you get all these wires ran together, I'm gonna put this in here real quickly. I know I said that was enough, but this is something you need to know. When you put all these wires together, you have to remove this plate to get the wires run underneath it. There's a retaining plate under here, and there's a retaining plate up here. Then you have to put this down. There's a ring in there that looks kind of like a piston ring. You have to compress it to slide this down over it. That's what it pivots or slides on or rotates on. These wires that come out of here, you need to wrap them in something that's pliable. It has to be soft, because again, I think the magnetic resistance is what pulls this. And with this one on the old one being hard as a brick, that's what was keeping this from coming back down an idle on its own, is why I had to put a helper spring on there to pull it back to an idle. But this is cloth tape. It works really well. It'll keep this same integrity for quite a while on this boat motor. This is the same stuff they use on older cars. You may have opened the hood on an old car and seen the wiring harness, and whatever they had on the wiring harness looked like it was burned or shredded or whatever. That's because it's cloth. It does last longer and stays pliable longer than vinyl tape, is why I used it. On this boat motor, don't get real extremely hot. So I think it'll last a long time, and it flexes really good, so I shouldn't have any problem with it wanting to come back to an idle anymore. With this pulling the magnetic draw that it should, and the coil, that should work as the spring to pull all this back. But get you some of that cloth electrical tape, wrap that up, and you'll be perfect from then on out. All right, I appreciate y'all watching. Like and subscribe. I'll put the further post up or the future post up as I make them, or videos. Bring y'all along with me on learning how to work on a 2-stroke boat motor, because it's not my forte. See y'all later, and keep on watching.